Thank you everyone for coming. This is our talk around the principles for package repository security framework. We'll kick it off with some introductions. I am Jack Cable. I'm a senior technical advisor at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, where I help lead the agency's work around open source software security as well as secure by design. And for the purposes of this talk, I also was a co-author of the Principles for Package Repository Security Framework, which we'll be getting into today around what we are trying to accomplish with that. Zach?
I'm Zach Steindler. My day job is at GitHub, and I spend about half of that working with our open source users and the other half working with our enterprise customers, both in the area of supply chain security. I co-authored the principles for repository security with Jack, and I am a co-chair of the OpenSSF Securing Repos Working Group. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what the perspective is here from both in terms of the working group and CISA. So it will surprise no one here to learn that open source package repositories are a very juicy target for attackers. It's a platform by which they can host content, malicious or otherwise. And if they can confuse people into using their content instead of vetted content that might be have a similar name via like a typo squatting attack, they can really use it to amplify their attack and quickly compromise many open source projects. Also, unfortunately, attackers are very clever, and so they will refine their techniques and their attack methods in a single ecosystem. And then if that ecosystem implements countermeasures, they will pivot to the next one and just sort of chain over their attack and try to do as much damage as possible. So the goal of the working group is to stop them. To quote the Dropkick Murphys, together we are what we can't be alone. And so by sharing tools and techniques and resources, we can take what the attacker advantage was, where they're taking their learnings and pivot them from ecosystem to ecosystem, and we can do the same thing. The working group, it's kind of like a formal name. In actuality, it is quite informal. We meet every other week. And we're discussing these various topics that we're talking about, policies, security capabilities, other ways to prevent people from attacking these open source systems that we all rely on daily to produce software. Some important things to note about the working group. It is opt-in. There's no requirements for anyone to participate in it. Many of the participants are volunteers. Often working for nonprofits. And so we want to be very respectful of maintainers' time and attention and resources. We are not creating a laundry list of things for them to complete. And also to that end, these are recommendations. These are not mandates. So we're not saying that there's something that everyone has to do by a certain date. Rather, we're providing a shared resource, basically, to kind of like raise the bar across the entire ecosystem.
Awesome. And just to give a bit of background, you might be wondering, okay, why is a U.S. government agency getting involved in the security of package repositories? What's the angle there? And for those unfamiliar, CISA, we're the nation's cyber defense agency, so we're focused on protecting both the federal government as well as critical infrastructure, hospitals, water systems, schools that we all rely on. And as part of that, and as outlined in the White House's National Cybersecurity Strategy that was released last year, the security of open source software is, of course, essential to the security of our critical infrastructure, to our government. So something that we very much see as within our realm of responsibilities to help protect. Now, how are we going to go about that at CISA? Last year, we put out our open source software security roadmap, which lays out our approach. And really central to this is the direction that we are not trying to regulate or control open source software. We know that's not going to work. What we want to do is show up as a community member and see how we can help contribute the government's resources to really help secure this ecosystem that we all rely on. So the open source security roadmap we put out lays out a couple goals, and one of the key items in there is around the security of package repositories, because we know that these platforms are at a really critical junction where they're able to foster security improvements that can scale out to entire open source ecosystem. But at the same time, as we know, many of these repositories are themselves under-resourced, and we want to see how we can help kind of drive towards a common vision that will help raise the bar for everyone. So what are we actually doing with the principles for package repository security framework? Well, it's a maturity model for package repositories, and essentially lays out, kind of similar to SALSA, if people are familiar with that, 4 different levels of security maturity for a package repository, and that ranges from a basic level of security maturity to more advanced security. And as part of this, there's a recognition that no one today is perfect. No one's being everything. It's going to be kind of a continual journey to improve. And we also lay out 4 different categories of security capabilities along the lines of authentication, authorization, general capabilities, as well as CLI tooling that we identify and classify the security capabilities under. And I'll get into what exactly these look like in a bit, and how we're working to foster adoption. But just one other note is that we also recognize that no 2 package repositories are the same, that some have kind of complex authentication, authorization schemes where people register accounts, manage those, and all the security considerations that come with that. And others might not have accounts at all and just point back to some source control repository and essentially outsource their authentication to that. So we want to make sure that we're accounting for a wide range of types of package repositories so that our framework can be as helpful as useful. And pass it back to Zach.
Yeah, so this project is a little weird maybe compared to other parts of the OpenSSF, where the OpenSSF as a whole is targeting almost everyone who has any relation to software, right? It's people who are consuming open source software, people who are writing open source software, people who are writing commercial software, people who are maintaining these systems that are crucial to providing open source software. So we're very much in that last category. So today the principles document is really focused on the people who are operating those open source package repositories. And specifically, there's 2 ways we're hoping that they will use this document. So the first is in producing their roadmap. Again, the goal here is that each ecosystem shouldn't have to start at the bare minimum of creating a threat model from scratch, thinking about inventorying all the supply chain attacks that have happened over the past 15 years. If we can share and pool these resources, we're going to save a lot of time and energy by learning from each other and sharing that context. And so if you are a package repository, or maybe you're part of a commercial offering that is thinking of offering something that kind of looks like a package repository, you can use this document to think about the threat model. If you have something already released, you can assess where you're at, and then you can think about what next steps make the most sense, where you can get the most impact for the amount of effort that you put in. And then the second part, money, everyone's favorite topic. So again, a lot of these repositories are being operated by nonprofits. It's often a handful of individuals who are both time and financially constrained. However, it's sort of never been a better time to apply for funding for securing open source. There's entities in the OpenSSF like Alpha Omega. There's also the Sovereign Tech Fund and a number of other entities the working group is working on inventorying, who not just are looking to fund individual security capabilities, but more and more create this role of a security in residence or security residency, where someone over the course of 1 or 2 years will implement a set of security capabilities. And so, which set? So don't have them take their first 3 months making a threat model unless you really want to. Use this as a resource to help you write your grant application and help kind of like define what one of those residencies might look like, either capabilities you think you can land in that year, or sort of like stepping stone capabilities that help you get to a higher maturity level, but that have prerequisites that give you a security benefit along the way.
Great. So what's actually in the framework? As I mentioned, we have 4 general buckets where the capabilities fall into. I'll walk through each of these briefly, and then I'll dive a bit more into the authentication one. For the sake of time, won't go into everything that's in there, but of course, recommend people to check out and provide feedback on the document, which we'll give you a link to at the end. So the first bucket is around authentication, and this has to do with practices like multi-factor authentication, and we lay out kind of a maturity model I'll get into in a second around how we think package repositories can kind of continually uplift what they're doing there. We also lay out some practices around authorization. This might look like making sure that developers, maintainers are able to have API keys scoped specifically to certain repositories to limit the impact if an API key is compromised. Might also look like allowing maintainers to have roles so that not everyone has to have complete access to a given repository. Under general capabilities, we include items like operating a vulnerability disclosure policy so that security researchers can report vulnerabilities related to the package repository's infrastructure. We also talk about actions to prevent typo squatting attacks, which we know are one of the more pervasive threats right now, and we've also seen a number of package repositories doing good work to make it harder for adversaries to target users, whether it's by detecting for similar names or similar approaches. And then lastly, we lay out practices under CLI tooling itself to make sure that all of these security benefits are getting to the developers who are actually using these these package repositories. And that might look like warning developers around known vulnerabilities, adding some friction there to make sure that developers are at least aware that they're installing something with a known vulnerability. We also lay out approaches to kind of reduce some of that fatigue on developers. So some ecosystems like Golang and Rust have introduced approaches where you can actually see if you're affected by a vulnerability through some static analysis. Not something that is possible in every language, but certainly we encourage that to lower the false positive rate and make it more likely that developers are willing to incorporate a patch. So to get into a bit deeper kind of how this maturity model looks like, let's dive into authentication. And as you can see, and kind of implicit in here is level 0, which is the package repository does not support MFA. We want to get to a place where for the first level, at least MFA is supported in case that developers choose to do so, and that there's also a documented account recovery policy so that when someone loses access to their account, they're able to regain access, of course, without opening up doors for attackers to leverage that policy to compromise users' accounts. Kind of one level above that is supporting the most secure form of MFA, phishing-resistant MFA, either through physical security keys or passkeys, and also starting to require multi-factor authentication for some packages that are deemed critical, perhaps say based on the level of use of those packages, and we've seen some ecosystems doing this. And then the highest level is requiring some form of MFA for all packages and requiring phishing-resistant MFA for a subset of those deemed critical. And we've even seen some package repositories go above and beyond, say, by providing security keys to some of their top maintainers at no cost to those maintainers.
Did it work? I would say we succeeded for version 0.1. I would say we exceeded expectations maybe for v0.1. There were certainly lessons we learned along the way, though. Maybe this won't be a surprise to people who are involved in technical projects, but it turned out that we could have done a better job initially setting sort of like the scope and the rules of engagement. And so if you're looking to do something like this, either a partnership between open source and public sector, private sector, or giving security guidance generally to open source communities, one thing we would absolutely recommend doing upfront is understanding the framing for your engagements. Oh goodness, I'm gonna have to go quickly. What are your goals? What aren't your goals? And then what sort of contributions that you're looking for. And not only working with your community to define those, but also write them down. As the project went on, we solicited information from package repositories to sort of assess our framework, and having this information written down that we could point them at would have been very helpful for people joining the project midstream. Speaking of writing things down, I would highly recommend attaching a dictionary to your project. Even the term package repositories took us a while to standardize on. Every ecosystem has slightly different terminology. And just like before, aligning on that terminology and writing it down so that when people join your project midstream, they know what you're talking about, they can onboard more quickly, and they can get to contributing. And then last but not least, surprising no one, timing. I think our project ran a little bit over. That was okay. But anytime you're collaborating with volunteers, especially in the open source community, there's commitments, either personal or work related, that are going to take them away from the project. And so just make sure you're giving enough time to have that feedback coming in from different sources if you're up against like a funding deadline or, say, a conference.
Awesome. So where are we going next? So we recently, about a month ago, held a summit at CISA's offices with many members from open source communities. And one of the things that came out of that was we announced actions that 5 prominent package repositories are taking to adapt the principles for package repository security framework and items in there. And we're excited to continue pushing forward on that. You can read more about those details in a press release we put out with that event. But really, we want to see how we can help package repositories in every ecosystem work to adapt the practices laid within this framework. And then, of course, as Zach noted, we're at v0.1. We're going to be working towards v0.2. There's a pull request where we are soliciting feedback, would welcome input from anyone, whether you operate a package repository, whether you use package repositories, whether you have opinions. Please do take a look, provide input. We're excited to see how we can continue to making this something that is both actionable, widely applicable, and can be adapted to help foster security improvements for everyone. And with that, I'll leave you with a link to the Principles for Package Repository Security Framework, and thank you for coming to our talk.
Do we have a minute or two for questions, or do we need to get off stage?
Not seeing anyone tell us no, so questions, anyone? Take maybe 1 or 2. Yeah. Question is around what about verifying the integrity of artifacts. That's certainly something that we talk about in the framework. We have some language in there around both kind of verifying the provenance of where data comes from. We also know that many ecosystems are doing work around things like SigStore to actually sign what's in there, operate transparency logs around the packages, and we want that to be both something, one of the kind of conversations we had led us to realize that, okay, we talk about operating a transparency log right now, but we don't actually talk about in the CLI tooling actually verifying that what the developer is downloading is actually in line with that. So one of the areas where we're going to be working to revise in the next version. And with that, I'm being told to stop to get off the stage, but thank you, everyone.